Dearest listeners, it is a truth universally acknowledged that revenge, much like the finest French champagne, loses its effervescence when left too long uncorked. Today, your humble chronicler brings you the most extraordinary tale of a debt paid in flesh and blood, and a heart frozen by betrayal that required the warmth of genuine love to thaw. But let us not rush, for the best stories, like the finest Madeira, must be savored properly. The drawing rooms of Mayfair had witnessed many a social catastrophe in the spring of 1818, but few could rival the spectacular fall of Lord Beaumont. Once a gentleman of considerable fortune and impeccable breeding, he had descended into that most treacherous of vices, the gaming tables of St. James's. His decline had been gradual at first, then precipitous, like a carriage losing its wheel upon a steep descent. By the time the daffodils bloomed in Hyde Park that fateful April, his debts had mounted to such astronomical heights that even the most charitable of his creditors had lost patience. Lady Rosalind Beaumont, at 22, possessed the sort of beauty that poets might describe as ethereal, though she herself would have preferred to be thought clever rather than comely. Her hair, the color of autumn chestnuts, was always arranged with meticulous care, not from vanity, but from a desperate need to maintain appearances despite their reduced circumstances. Her eyes, a remarkable shade of amber that caught the light like honey held to the sun, often held a pensiveness that belied her years. She had been raised with all the accomplishments expected of a lady of quality. She could paint watercolors that were deemed quite charming, play the pianoforte with technical precision if not passionate flair, and speak French with an accent that would not embarrass her in Parisian society. Yet beneath these polished accomplishments lay a mind of considerable acuity and a spirit that had been tempered by years of managing a household, whilst maintaining the fiction that nothing was amiss. She had learned to stretch a guinea to do the work of 5, to smile graciously whilst wearing gowns that had been turned and retrimmed multiple times, and to deflect the increasingly persistent questions about why she had not yet married with a lightness that never betrayed her growing desperation. The Beaumont townhouse in Berkeley Square, once a jewel of architectural elegance, now bore subtle signs of neglect that only the most observant would notice. A worn patch in the Turkish carpet, artfully hidden beneath a strategically placed chair. Holland covers on furniture in rooms no longer heated. The conspicuous absence of fresh flowers, save for those Rosalind herself gathered from the small garden behind the house. The staff had been reduced to a bare minimum. Their faithful butler, Hedges, who had been with the family since Lord Beaumont's youth and now worked for bed and board alone. Mrs. Pritchard, the housekeeper who doubled as lady's maid, and young Tom, who served as footman, groom, and whatever else was required. Yet Rosalind had learned to navigate these straits with remarkable ingenuity. When the coal merchant had threatened to cut off their supply last winter, she had discovered, through careful eavesdropping at a tea party, that his daughter desperately wished for watercolor lessons from a genteel instructor. Rosalind had offered her services in exchange for coal credit, phrasing it as a favor to the merchant rather than a desperate bargain. When creditors came calling, she met them herself, employing a mixture of aristocratic hauteur and carefully calculated charm that invariably bought them more time. She had become, through necessity, an expert in the delicate art of maintaining dignity while dancing on the edge of ruin. Lord Beaumont himself had become a shadow of his former self, spending his days locked in his study, emerging only to haunt his clubs in search of one more game, one more chance to reverse his fortunes. His once handsome face had grown gaunt, his eyes fevered with the gambler's perpetual optimism that the next hand would surely restore everything. He no longer noticed his daughter's worried glances or the way she had begun to refuse social invitations, knowing they could not reciprocate the hospitality. The morning that changed everything dawned gray and oppressive, with clouds hanging low over London like a funeral shroud. Rosalind had risen early, as was her custom, to review the household accounts, a depressing exercise that involved creative mathematics to make their dwindling resources stretch another month. She sat at her mother's escritoire, a beautiful piece of French craftsmanship that she had thus far managed to keep from the auction houses, though she knew its days were numbered. The faint scent of her mother's favorite rose perfume still lingered in the drawers, a ghost of better times that made her heart ache. The figures before her were damning. Even with the most stringent economies, they could not last beyond Michaelmas. The butcher had already begun making inquiries about his account, and the coal merchant, despite her arrangement regarding his daughter, had made it clear that no more credit would be extended beyond what the lessons covered. She had pawned the last of her mother's jewelry save for her wedding ring, which she could not bear to part with, though she knew that sentimentality was a luxury she could ill afford. She was contemplating the unthinkable, approaching her mother's sister, Lady Fenwick, who had made it abundantly clear that she disapproved of Lord Beaumont and would only assist Rosalind if she agreed to cut all ties with her father, when the sound of the front door opening with unusual force interrupted her melancholy calculations. Her father's voice, raised in apparent triumph, echoed through the hall. This was alarming in itself, for Lord Beaumont rarely displayed emotion these days beyond despair or desperate hope. Hedges appeared in the doorway, his weathered face bearing an expression of profound concern that immediately set her nerves on edge. The old butler had seen the family through many crises, but something in his demeanor suggested this was different, momentous in a way that could bode either very well or very ill. His lordship requested her immediate presence in his study, Hedges intoned, though his eyes conveyed a warning that something was gravely amiss. The way he lingered, as if wanting to say more, increased her apprehension. She rose, smoothing her skirts, a nervous habit she had developed in recent months, and made her way to her father's study with the feeling that she was walking toward a precipice. The study, once a handsome room lined with leather-bound volumes and sporting prints, now showed the same signs of decline as the rest of the house. Gaps in the bookshelves revealed where valuable first editions had been sold, and the Stubbs painting that had once held pride of place above the mantelpiece had been replaced by an inferior copy that fooled no one who looked closely. The room smelled of stale tobacco and desperation, a combination that had become all too familiar. Lord Beaumont stood behind his desk, his face flushed with what she initially took for excitement, but quickly recognized as something more akin to hysteria. Papers were scattered across the desktop, legal documents from their appearance, and his hands trembled slightly as he gestured for her to sit. She remained standing, some instinct warning her that she would need to be on her feet for whatever was coming. He began with elaborate enthusiasm, proclaiming that their troubles were at an end, that a gentleman of great fortune had agreed to assume all his debts. Every last farthing would be paid, every creditor satisfied. They were saved, rescued from the brink of disaster by Providence itself. The very extravagance of his claims sent a chill through Rosalind's heart. She had learned through bitter experience that her father's moments of greatest optimism often preceded his most catastrophic decisions. When she pressed for details, for the name of this miraculous benefactor, he could not meet her eyes. The name, when it finally came, struck her like a physical blow. Adrian Cavendish, Marquis of Northwick. The memories came flooding back, the scandal of 5 years past that had set all of London ablaze with gossip. Lord Northwick had been engaged to marry Lady Lydia Asherton, the acknowledged diamond of that season, a beauty whose charm and vivacity had captivated the ton. The wedding had been planned as the social event of the year, St. George's, Hanover Square, bedecked with flowers, the wedding breakfast to be held at her father's mansion in Grosvenor Square. Then, just 3 days before the ceremony, Lady Lydia had eloped with Mr. James Pemberton, the second son of a country squire with nothing to recommend him but a handsome face and a talent for pretty speeches. The humiliation had been complete and very public. Lady Lydia had left a letter, the contents of which had somehow become known to all of society, declaring that she would rather live in poverty with love than in luxury with a man whose heart was as cold as his ancestral marble halls. Since that spectacular betrayal, Lord Northwick had become something of a legend in the ton. The man who had turned his heart to ice, who attended social functions only when absolutely necessary, who never danced, never smiled, never showed the slightest interest in any of the young ladies paraded before him by hopeful mamas. He was known to be harsh in business dealings, unforgiving of debts, and possessed of a demeanor that could freeze champagne in its glass. That such a man would suddenly decide to marry and to choose such an unusual method of acquiring a bride suggested motivations that made Rosalind's blood run cold. The truth, when her father finally admitted it, was worse than she had imagined. He had not merely mentioned her accomplishments to Lord Northwick. He had actively negotiated her sale, like a merchant haggling over goods at the exchange. The arrangement was breathtakingly simple in its cold practicality. Lord Northwick would assume all of Lord Beaumont's debts, ensuring he would not face debtor's prison or social ruin. In exchange, Rosalind would become the Marchioness of Northwick, providing her husband with the heir his estates required and the social companion his position demanded. It was a business transaction, pure and simple, with Rosalind as the commodity being exchanged. The rage that filled her was unlike anything she had ever experienced. She, who had always been dutiful, always been obedient, always put her family's needs before her own desires, had been sold like a painting or a piece of jewelry to satisfy her father's debts. The betrayal cut deeper than any privation they had endured, any humiliation they had suffered. Her father had taken the one thing that was truly hers, her future, her choice of husband, her chance at happiness, and bartered it away without even consulting her. Yet even as anger burned through her, cold reality asserted itself. What choice did she truly have? If she refused, her father would go to debtor's prison. She knew what happened to the families of imprisoned debtors, had seen the daughters of ruined men disappear from society, their fates varying from governess positions in remote counties to circumstances too dreadful to be spoken of in polite company. At least marriage to Lord Northwick, cold and calculating though it might be, offered security and position. She would be a marchioness, mistress of great estates, able to help those she cared about from a position of power rather than penury. Lord Northwick was to call that very afternoon at 3 o'clock to make her acquaintance and discuss the arrangements. She had mere hours to reconcile herself to a fate she had never imagined, to prepare herself to meet the man who would own her as surely as if she were a slave on an auction block. She spent those hours in a strange state of detachment, as if watching someone else prepare for sacrifice. Mrs. Pritchard, who had somehow learned of the situation through that mysterious network of servant intelligence that operated below stairs, helped her dress with tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. The faithful retainer chose Rosalind's best afternoon gown, a soft blue silk that had survived from better days, and arranged her hair with particular care, as if beautiful presentation could somehow soften the harsh reality of what was happening. At precisely 3 o'clock, the sound of a magnificent carriage drawing up outside announced the arrival of the Marquess. Rosalind positioned herself in the drawing room, standing by the window where the afternoon light would show her to best advantage. If she was to be merchandise, at least she would not appear shop-worn. She heard his voice in the hall, deep and cultured, with an undertone that suggested permanent winter, and steeled herself for the encounter. Even his footsteps on the marble floor sounded cold, precise, measured, like a man who had calculated every movement of his life. When Adrian Cavendish, Marquess of Northwick, entered the room, Rosalind's first thought was that the gossips had not exaggerated. He was indeed as cold as his reputation suggested, though undeniably handsome in the way that classical statues are handsome, all perfect proportions and sharp angles. He stood well above 6 feet, with shoulders that suggested athletic pursuits, despite his reputation for avoiding society. His hair was raven black, styled in the fashion of the day, but somehow seeming natural rather than affected. His eyes were perhaps his most striking feature, a gray so pale they seemed almost silver, like winter ice, and just as cold. He paused in the doorway, his gaze traveling over her with the kind of assessment one might give to a horse at Tattersall's. She saw him note her height, tall for a woman but well-proportioned, her figure, her complexion, her bearing. It was a clinical examination, devoid of any warmth or appreciation, merely cataloging assets and potential deficiencies. Rosalind lifted her chin and met his gaze directly, refusing to be cowed by his examination. If he wanted to inspect his purchase, she would ensure he understood that she was not some meek miss who would simper and submit. She had been sold, yes, but she would not be broken. The introduction, when Lord Beaumont performed it with obvious nervousness, was a study in contrasts. Her father's eager obsequiousness against Lord Northwick's Arctic courtesy, her own rigid composure against the emotional turmoil beneath. The Marquess bowed with perfect correctness, but no warmth. and she responded with a curtsy that matched his formality precisely. When he spoke, addressing her directly for the first time, his voice held all the warmth of a January wind. He inquired about her accomplishments with the same tone one might use to discuss the weather, and she responded with equal coolness, listing her abilities as if reading from an inventory. Yes, she could manage a household. Yes, she was accomplished in all the usual ways expected of a lady. Yes, she understood the duties required of a marchioness. The negotiation that followed was surreal in its businesslike nature. Lord Northwick outlined his requirements with the same dispassion one might use when ordering a new carriage. He needed a wife to provide an heir. The Northwick estates were entailed, and he had no close male relatives. He required a hostess for those social occasions his position demanded. He expected propriety, dignity, and discretion. In return, she would have her own quarters in both the London and country houses, a generous allowance, her own carriage and horses, and complete freedom within the bounds of propriety. What he did not offer, what was conspicuously absent from his list, was any mention of affection, companionship, or regard. This was to be a marriage in name and law, but not in heart. They would share a name, a house, and occasionally a bed, for the procreation of heirs, but nothing more. Lord Beaumont, hovering anxiously by the fireplace, attempted to interject with platitudes about the honor of the alliance, the excellence of the match, but neither Rosalind nor Lord Northwick paid him any attention. This was between the two of them now, the buyer and the bought, the terms of sale being negotiated with ruthless honesty. Rosalind found herself oddly appreciating Lord Northwick's directness. At least there was no pretense, no false protestations of sudden affection or destiny. He was buying a wife because he needed one, choosing her because she met his requirements and came at a price he was willing to pay. The brutal honesty of it was almost refreshing after years of her father's self-deception and society's polite lies. When he asked what she expected from the arrangement, she matched his directness with her own. Respect for her position as his marchioness, protection from want or social disgrace, a household to manage, and a place in society. She did not mention love or affection. It was clear such things were not on offer, and she would not humiliate herself by asking for what would not be given. The one moment of genuine emotion came when she asked about her father's debts, wanting to know the exact price of her sale. Lord Northwick's eyes flickered with something that might have been surprise at her bluntness, but he answered readily enough. The sum was staggering, more than she had feared, enough to have destroyed them utterly. That her father had accumulated such massive debts was a fresh shock, another betrayal to add to the tally. The wedding was set for 1 month hence, enough time to have the banns read and avoid scandal. Not enough time for her to fully accept what was happening. Lord Northwick rose to leave, the interview concluded to his satisfaction, the transaction agreed upon. As he reached the door, he turned back, and for a moment she thought he might say something human, something to acknowledge the magnitude of what had just been decided. Instead, he merely informed her that his solicitors would call with the settlement papers, and that she would find them generous. He was many things, he assured her, but not miserly. As his wife, she would want for nothing material. The emphasis on that last word was subtle, but unmistakable. Material comfort would be abundant. Emotional comfort was not part of the bargain. The weeks that followed passed in a blur of activity that left little time for reflection, which was perhaps a mercy. True to his word, Lord Northwick proved generous in material matters. A modest trousseau appeared as if by magic, delivered by the finest modistes who treated Rosalind with the deference due to a future marchioness. The gowns were beautiful but conservative, rich fabrics in muted colors, everything of the finest quality, but nothing that would draw undue attention. Even in this, she could see his calculating mind at work. His wife must be impeccably dressed but not ostentatious, elegant but not eye-catching. The settlement papers, when they arrived, were indeed generous. Her pin money would exceed what her father had spent in his prosperous years. She would have her own carriage and horses, her own household accounts, and a jointure that would leave her wealthy should she be widowed. Every material comfort was provided for, every financial concern addressed. It was the most comprehensive purchase agreement she had ever seen, lacking only any provision for the feeding and care of her heart. She saw Lord Northwick only twice more before their wedding day. Once at Almack's, where their engagement was formally announced, causing a sensation that rippled through the ton like a stone dropped in still water. The patronesses, those formidable arbiters of social acceptability, regarded her with expressions ranging from pity to calculation. Lady Jersey, never one to resist gossip, cornered her near the refreshment table, desperate for details about how she had captured the uncapturable Marquis. Rosalind's response, that Lord Northwick had required a wife and she had been available, shocked the patroness with its frankness. When pressed about affection between them, Rosalind wondered aloud whether affection was truly necessary in marriages of their class, a question that sent Lady Jersey retreating in visible discomfort. It was easier to shock than to endure pity, easier to appear brazen than broken. The second meeting was at her father's house, where Lord Northwick came to sign the settlements. He was accompanied by his man of business, a sharp-featured individual named Mr. Blackthorne, who looked at everything and everyone with professional suspicion. The signing was performed with all the romance of a property transfer, which Rosalind supposed it essentially was. The wedding day dawned gray and drizzling, which seemed appropriate given the circumstances. Rosalind stood before her mirror as Mrs. Pritchard arranged the Brussels lace veil that had been her mother's, trying to recognize herself in the elegant stranger reflected there. Her wedding dress was of ivory silk, simply cut but exquisitely made, with tiny seed pearls embroidered along the hem and sleeves. The Northwick diamonds delivered that morning lay cold and heavy against her throat, beautiful, valuable, and as impersonal as everything else about this arrangement. Lord Beaumont appeared in the doorway, looking more presentable than he had in months. The settlement of his debts had restored some of his former confidence, though Rosalind noted he could not quite meet her eyes. He complimented her appearance and ventured that her mother would be proud, a statement that sparked a flash of anger Rosalind quickly suppressed. Would her mother be proud that her daughter had been sold to pay gaming debts? They both knew the answer to that question. The church, St. George's, Hanover Square, the same church where Lord Northwick's first wedding should have taken place, was nearly empty when they arrived. The vast space felt cavernous with so few witnesses, the empty pews seeming to mock the grandeur of the setting. Lord Northwick stood at the altar, resplendent in a coat of midnight blue superfine, looking as remote and perfect as ever. His only attendant was a middle-aged gentleman whom Rosalind recognized as his cousin, Mr. George Cavendish. On her side, there was only her father and Mrs. Pritchard, who had insisted on attending despite the irregularity. The ceremony was brief and austere. Lord Northwick's voice as he spoke his vows was steady and emotionless, as if he were reading a legal document rather than pledging his life to another. Rosalind matched his tone, speaking her own vows clearly and without sentiment. When instructed to kiss his bride, the Marquis merely brushed his lips against hers so briefly she barely felt it, though the touch sent an unexpected shiver through her that she quickly suppressed. The wedding breakfast was held at Northwick House in Grosvenor Square, a mansion so grand it made the Beaumont townhouse look like a cottage. The facade was impressive enough, Portland stone with Corinthian columns flanking the entrance, but the interior was breathtaking. The entrance hall alone, with its black and white marble floor and sweeping double staircase, was larger than the entire ground floor of her father's house. Yet for all its magnificence, it felt cold. The marble seemed to leach warmth from the air, and their footsteps echoed hollowly in the vast space. The scent of beeswax and silver polish was almost oppressive, speaking of rigorous maintenance, but no real life. Priceless artwork adorned the walls, and every piece of furniture spoke of generations of wealth and taste, yet it all felt more like a museum than a home. The guests were few, some cousins of the Marquis, who looked at Rosalind with barely concealed curiosity, her father who drank rather more champagne than was wise, and a handful of society matrons who had likely come to gather gossip for the ton. Rosalind moved through it all in a daze, accepting congratulations that rang hollow, smiling until her face ached, playing the part of the happy bride while feeling as if she were watching someone else's life from a great distance. Lord Northwick, her husband now, though the thought seemed impossible, stood beside her, occasionally offering his arm when movement was required, but otherwise treating her with the same courteous indifference he might show to a stranger at a public assembly. He introduced her to the guests with perfect propriety but no warmth, referring to her as "my wife," in a tone that made the words sound like a business title rather than a term of affection. As the afternoon waned and the guests began to depart, the reality of her situation began to settle upon her like a heavy cloak. This grand house was now her home, though it felt more like a beautiful prison than a residence. The cold, beautiful man beside her was now her husband, though he felt more like a stranger than ever. The life she had known, limited though it had been, was over, replaced by something that promised material comfort but emotional desolation. Lord Beaumont was the last to leave, embracing his daughter with tears in his eyes. He whispered wishes for her happiness, though they both knew happiness was not part of the bargain that had been struck. She watched him go with a mixture of love and resentment, forgiveness and anger, all tangled together in a knot she could not begin to untie. When the great door closed behind him, Rosalind found herself alone with her husband in the vast entrance hall. The silence stretched between them, taut as a pianoforte string, until she thought it might snap from the tension. The servants had discreetly withdrawn, leaving them to navigate this first moment of their married life without an audience. Lord Northwick spoke first, his voice echoing slightly in the marble hall. He instructed that Mrs. Henley, the housekeeper, would show her to her quarters, his tone as impersonal as if he were directing a guest rather than his bride. He mentioned that they dined at 8 and that he preferred punctuality, the kind of household information one might give to a new servant rather than a wife. He turned to go, then paused, looking back at her with those remarkable silver eyes. He welcomed her to Northwick House and expressed hope that she would be comfortable there, the hesitation before comfortable suggesting he had been about to say something else, happy perhaps or content, but had thought better of it. Then he was gone, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor as he disappeared into the depths of the house, leaving her alone in the vast entrance hall with only the ticking of an enormous ormolu clock for company. Mrs. Henley, the housekeeper, appeared as if summoned by some invisible signal. She was a woman of perhaps 50 years, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and a face that suggested she had forgotten how to smile sometime in the previous decade. Her black bombazine dress rustled as she moved, and everything about her bearing suggested rigid propriety and professional distance. The Marchioness's quarters were on the second floor, a suite of rooms that included a sitting room, dressing room, and bedchamber, all decorated in shades of pale gold and cream. They were beautiful, luxurious, and as impersonal as a hotel. Not a single personal item suggested that anyone had ever lived here before. The furniture was French, all gilt and silk, more suitable for display than comfort. The paintings on the walls were valuable but cold. Landscapes of places she did not recognize, portraits of people she did not know. Even the air felt sterile, scented faintly with lavender water, but lacking any trace of human habitation. Mrs. Henley informed her that these had been the late Marchioness's rooms, Lord Northwick's mother, but had been completely redecorated since her death 5 years prior. Everything was new, pristine, untouched by personal history. It was as if Lord Northwick had deliberately erased any trace of former occupants, creating a blank slate for her to inhabit, or perhaps ensuring that she left no more lasting impression than those who had come before. When Mrs. Pritchard arrived with her few personal belongings, her familiar face was so welcome that Rosalind nearly wept. The older woman took one look at her mistress and opened her arms, providing the first human warmth Rosalind had felt all day. For a moment, she allowed herself to be comforted like a child, breathing in the familiar scent of lavender and starch that had meant safety since childhood. The first dinner in her new home set the pattern for those that followed. The dining room was enormous, with a table that could easily seat 40. Tonight, however, only 2 places were set, at opposite ends of the vast expanse of polished mahogany. The distance between them made conversation nearly impossible without raising one's voice, which she suspected was entirely intentional. Lord Northwick was already seated when she entered, rising politely as footmen pulled out her chair with practiced precision. The meal progressed in near silence, broken only by the soft clink of silver on china and the whisper of footmen moving about their duties. The food was exquisite. Clearly the Marquis employed an excellent chef, but Rosalind barely tasted it. Each course appeared and disappeared with clockwork precision. Soup à la reine, turbot in lobster sauce, roasted pheasant with accompanying removes, elaborate desserts that looked more like art than food. She ate mechanically, aware that the servants would report to their master if she did not, but finding no pleasure in the magnificent feast. Lord Northwick ate with the same mechanical precision, cutting his food into precise pieces, chewing the requisite number of times, showing no more pleasure in the meal than if he were consuming sawdust. Occasionally, she caught him glancing down the length of the table at her, his expression unreadable, but he made no attempt at conversation. After dinner, she withdrew to the drawing room as was customary, expecting him to remain with his port. Instead, he joined her after only a brief interval, taking a chair by the fire at a careful distance from where she had settled with her embroidery. He had a book, some treatise on agricultural improvement, and read in silence while she plied her needle with fingers that trembled slightly despite her best efforts at control. The fire crackled in the grate, the clock on the mantel ticked with metronomic precision, and the silence between them grew heavier with each passing moment. Finally, unable to bear it any longer, Rosalind set down her embroidery and looked directly at her husband. She asked if it was always to be like this silence, this distance, this careful avoidance of any real connection. He looked up from his book, one dark eyebrow raised in what might have been surprise that she had spoken. When he asked what she would prefer, his tone suggested genuine curiosity beneath the customary coldness. She expressed a desire for conversation, even if only about trivial matters. They were condemned to spend their lives together. Surely they could manage some degree of discourse. His response was to ask what topics she would suggest, listing possibilities, weather, gossip, current events, with a mockery that stung more than she cared to admit. When she suggested he might tell her about the estate in Derbyshire, something shifted in his expression. For a moment, the mask slipped, and she glimpsed something underneath. Not warmth exactly, but perhaps a lessening of the cold. He began to speak about Ravensbrook Hall, his voice taking on a different quality as he described the estate that had been in his family for 300 years. 15,000 acres, he told her, with tenant farms, a home wood, and a village that depended on the estate for its prosperity. The house itself was Elizabethan, much altered over the centuries, but retaining its essential character. When she asked if it was beautiful, his response was carefully neutral. But when she pressed about whether he had been happy there as a child, something flickered in those silver eyes. Pain, perhaps, or longing. His admission that happiness was a luxury he had rarely indulged in was delivered with such matter-of-fact acceptance that it made her heart ache despite her resolution to feel nothing for this man who had purchased her. 3 days later, they departed for Ravensbrook Hall. The journey took 2 days, with an overnight stop at a posting inn near Leicester. Lord Northwick rode alongside the carriage rather than joining her inside, maintaining even in travel the distance that seemed so essential to him. She watched him through the window, noting the excellent way he sat his horse, the unconscious grace of his movements. He was an accomplished horseman, clearly more comfortable in the saddle than in a drawing room. The countryside grew wilder and more beautiful as they traveled north. The neat hedgerows of the home counties gave way to dry stone walls and rugged hills, the landscape becoming more dramatic with each passing mile. Despite her circumstances, Rosalind found herself enchanted by the scenery, so different from the manicured prettiness of Kent, where she had spent her childhood. There was something honest about this landscape, something that demanded nothing less than truth. When they finally turned through a pair of massive iron gates topped with the Cavendish arms, her anticipation grew. The drive wound through ancient parkland, past groves of oak and beech that must have stood for centuries. Herds of deer grazed in the distance, lifting their heads to watch the carriage pass with liquid eyes. Then, as they crested a small rise, Ravensbrook Hall came into view, and Rosalind's breath caught in her throat. The house was magnificent, but not in the cold, perfect way of Northwick House in London. This was a living building, golden stone that seemed to glow in the afternoon sun, mullioned windows that caught the light like diamonds, twisted chimney stacks that spoke of centuries of hearth fires. It sprawled across the landscape with the confident elegance of something that had grown organically over time, each generation adding their own touch while respecting what had come before. Gardens stretched out on either side, formal parterres near the house giving way to more natural plantings that blended seamlessly with the surrounding countryside. Even from a distance, she could smell the sweetness of early roses carried on the warm breeze, hear the distant murmur of a fountain, sounds and scents entirely absent from the sterile perfection of the London mansion. Lord Northwick dismounted to hand her down from the carriage, and for a moment, as she expressed her genuine admiration for the beauty of his home, she saw real emotion cross his face. He mentioned that his mother had loved it here, had said the house had good bones and a kind heart. It was the first truly personal information he had volunteered, and Rosalind treasured it like a small gift, carefully stored away. The name Ravensbrook, he added quietly, came from the stream that ran through the eastern boundary. Ravens had nested in the ancient oaks there for as long as anyone could remember. The staff was assembled to meet their new mistress, a sea of faces that Rosalind knew she would need time to learn. Mr. Rushworth, the butler, was a dignified man of middle years who managed to convey both respect and a careful reserve, clearly withholding judgment until he had taken her measure. Mrs. Morgan, the housekeeper, was younger than Mrs. Henley and seemed more approachable, with kind eyes and a Welsh lilt to her voice that made Rosalind feel immediately more at ease. The welcome was warm but cautious, the staff clearly uncertain about this new mistress who had appeared so suddenly in their master's life. Lord Northwick, she noticed, commanded respect rather than affection from his servants. They performed their duties with perfect precision, but without the subtle signs of genuine attachment she had seen between longtime servants and their employers in other houses. The Marchioness's suite at Ravensbrook Hall was very different from the cold elegance of the London rooms. These chambers had warmth and character, with rich tapestries on the walls depicting scenes from mythology and legend, comfortable furniture that invited one to sit and read, and windows that looked out over the gardens to the hills beyond. Someone, Mrs. Morgan, she suspected, had filled vases with spring flowers from the gardens, and a fire crackled cheerfully in the grate despite the mildness of the evening. The scent of beeswax polish mingled with the lavender from fresh bundles. Mrs. Morgan had placed throughout the rooms, creating an atmosphere of lived-in comfort entirely absent from the London house. These rooms had not been redecorated, she realized. They retained the personality of their previous occupant, Lord Northwick's mother, and somehow that made them more welcoming than any amount of new furnishing could have achieved. She could see touches of a woman who had loved beauty but also comfort, a reading chair positioned to catch the best light, a writing desk with a view of the rose garden, a daybed where one might rest while enjoying the afternoon sun. Mrs. Morgan, who had accompanied her to ensure everything was satisfactory, revealed that the rooms had been closed since the late Marchioness's death 5 years ago, just before Lord Northwick's engagement to Lady Lydia. They had been opened and aired only when his lordship had written that he was bringing home a bride. There was something in the way she said it that suggested the household had been surprised by this development, perhaps even shocked. The first few weeks at Ravensbrook Hall established a pattern that was both comfortable and frustrating. Lord Northwick spent his days attending to estate business, riding out early to visit tenant farms, or closeting himself in his study with his steward, Mr. Barnes. Rosalind occupied herself with learning the workings of the household, a task made easier by Mrs. Morgan's patient guidance and the staff's obvious desire to please their new mistress once they had determined she was neither proud nor demanding. She discovered that despite his reputation for coldness, Lord Northwick was a conscientious landlord. The tenant cottages were well maintained, with new roofs when needed and proper drainage. Rents were fair, set at a level that allowed tenants to prosper in good years and survive in bad ones. He had instituted several progressive agricultural improvements, new methods of crop rotation, selective breeding of livestock, drainage of previously unusable land, that were increasing yields and improving the lot of everyone connected to the estate. The village of Ravensbrook spoke of him with respect, if not warmth. He was just, they said, fair in his dealings, generous to those in genuine need, though he had no patience for laziness or self-pity. The vicar, Mr. Wordsworth, a mild-mannered man more interested in his garden than his sermons, mentioned that his lordship was generous to the church and the parish poor, though he preferred his charity to remain anonymous. Yet for all his virtues as a landlord, Lord Northwick remained an enigma to his tenants and servants alike. He had no close friends in the county, attended only those social functions his position absolutely required, and had been known to go weeks without speaking to anyone beyond what estate business demanded. His isolation was self-imposed, but absolute, as if he had decided that connections with other people were a luxury, or perhaps a danger, he could not afford. In the evenings, they dined together in a dining room that, while still formal, was more intimate than the vast chamber in London. Here, she could smell the beeswax from the polished table, feel the warmth from the fire that actually heated the room rather than merely decorating it. Conversation remained stilted, confined mostly to estate matters and household concerns, but occasionally something would spark a moment of real communication. She learned that he had a passion for astronomy and had once considered studying at Cambridge before his father's death had called him home to assume the title. He discovered that she read Latin and Greek, accomplishments unusual for a woman, and seemed genuinely impressed by her translation of a passage from Homer he had been struggling with. Afterward, they would adjourn to the drawing room where Rosalind would work at her embroidery while Lord Northwick read. Sometimes she would play the pianoforte, choosing pieces that required concentration rather than emotion. Bach fugues, Scarlatti sonatas, technical exercises disguised as music. He never commented on her playing, but she noticed he would lower his book to listen, his fingers sometimes moving slightly as if following the rhythm. One evening, perhaps 3 weeks after their arrival, she was struggling with a particularly challenging passage from a Beethoven sonata when she heard him speak. The compliment on her playing was unexpected enough to make her fingers stumble on the keys. When she thanked him, he revealed that his mother had also played, filling the house with music that had gone silent since her death. The admission that she reminded him of his mother in this way was offered almost reluctantly, as if the words were pulled from him against his will. The conversation that followed was the longest they had yet shared. He spoke of his mother with a warmth she had not heard from him before, how she had been the heart of the house, bringing light and laughter to rooms that his father had preferred to keep somber and silent. She had possessed a gift for making people feel valued, for seeing the best in everyone, for finding joy in simple pleasures. Her death had left a void that he had never attempted to fill, preferring instead to close off the parts of the house and himself that had been touched by her warmth. When Rosalind asked if he had always been so determined to avoid happiness, his answer revealed more than perhaps he had intended. No, he admitted. There had been a time when he had believed in happiness, had even pursued it. His tone made it clear that this pursuit had ended badly, though he did not elaborate, and she did not press. She was learning that with Lord Northwick, patience was essential. Push too hard, and he would retreat behind his walls. Wait, and occasionally a door would open, if only for a moment. These small moments of connection were rare but precious, like gaps in a wall that allowed glimpses of what lay beyond. She began to piece together a picture of a man who had once been capable of warmth, even happiness, but who had built such formidable defenses that he had forgotten how to lower them. Whether those defenses had been constructed before or after Lady Lydia's betrayal, she could not yet determine, but she suspected the former had made the latter's impact all the more devastating. The turning point came on an afternoon in early June. The weather had been particularly fine, and Rosalind had been exploring the gardens, which were extensive and included areas of different character: formal Italian gardens near the house, a kitchen garden that supplied the household with vegetables and herbs, a rose garden that was just coming into its full glory, and beyond all these, a wilderness area that had been allowed to grow somewhat wild. She was following a barely visible path through a grove of rhododendrons, their massive blooms creating a tunnel of pink and purple, when she heard voices. She recognized her husband's immediately, that deep, cultured voice with its undertone of permanent winter. The other was unfamiliar, younger, with the slightly affected drawl that suggested a London dandy trying to sound more sophisticated than he was. She should have turned back immediately, should have respected their privacy. But something in the tone of the conversation, anger barely controlled, tension crackling like lightning before a storm, made her pause. Through the screen of leaves and blooms, she could see them in a small clearing. The stranger was fashionably dressed in the London style, his coat of superfine cut with the exaggerated shoulders and nipped waist that marked him as a follower of fashion rather than a setter of it. The conversation she overheard changed everything she thought she understood about her marriage. The young man was Mr. Thomas Asherton, brother to the infamous Lady Lydia. He had come to plead his sister's case. She was widowed, her husband having died in a coaching accident 2 years prior, leaving her with nothing but debts. She was living in genteel poverty in Bath, giving music lessons to the daughters of wealthy merchants to survive. One word from Lord Northwick could restore her to society, could ease her situation considerably. Lord Northwick's refusal was absolute and ice-cold. Lady Lydia had made her choice, he stated, had chosen love over position, passion over security. Now, she must live with the consequences of that choice. When Mr. Asherton accused him of spite, of letting her suffer out of revenge for her betrayal, Lord Northwick laughed, a bitter sound that held no mirth. Then came the revelation that made Rosalind's blood run cold. Mr. Asherton accused Lord Northwick of choosing her, Rosalind, specifically as an act of revenge. Her mother had been a Fairfax before her marriage. Lady Lydia's mother had also been a Fairfax. They were cousins, though distant ones. Lord Northwick had married Lady Lydia's cousin as a deliberate insult, a way of showing that he could have any woman of her bloodline he chose. Worse, Mr. Asherton claimed there was a physical resemblance, the same coloring, the same bearing, that made the insult all the more pointed. Lord Northwick's denial was not entirely convincing. He claimed less calculation than Mr. Asherton suggested, but he did not deny knowledge of the connection or the resemblance. The truth was clear. She had not been chosen randomly, not been selected merely because her father owed money. She had been chosen as a weapon in a 5-year-old war, a means of revenge against a woman who had humiliated him. She fled before she could hear more, running blindly through the gardens until she reached a small folly on a rise overlooking the lake. It was a pretty structure, built in the classical style with columns and a domed roof, the kind of romantic spot where lovers might meet for stolen moments. She sank onto a stone bench, her mind reeling from what she had learned. The cold stone beneath her seemed to leach warmth from her body, matching the chill that had settled in her heart. She was not just payment for her father's debts. She was an instrument of revenge, chosen for her blood connection to the woman who had humiliated him. Every time he looked at her, did he see Lady Lydia? Was she merely a constant reminder of his triumph? Proof that he had survived and prospered while the woman who betrayed him had fallen into poverty and disgrace? The sound of footsteps made her look up. Lord Northwick stood at the entrance to the folly, his expression unreadable in the shadow of the dome. He knew she had overheard. She could see it in the tension of his shoulders, the careful way he held himself, as if preparing for an assault. The confrontation that followed was brief but devastating. He did not deny the connection to Lady Lydia, though he claimed it had not been as calculated as Mr. Asherton suggested. When she accused him of seeing not her but her cousin's ghost whenever he looked at her, of her being merely not Lydia rather than Rosalind, she saw him flinch as if she had struck him. When she rose to leave, stating her intention to take dinner in her room, he spoke her given name for the first time. Rosalind. The sound of it in his voice, rough, almost pleading, stopped her in her tracks. For a moment, she felt the impact of hearing her name from his lips, the unexpected intimacy of it after weeks of formal address. His insistence that he did not hate her, that whatever his initial motivations, he did not hate her now, held a note of desperation she had never heard from him before. But she left him anyway, walking away from the folly with her spine straight and her head high, though inside she felt as if something had shattered. The fragile connection they had been building, those precious moments of growing understanding, seemed like self-deception now. How could she trust any softening in his manner when she knew she had been chosen as an instrument of revenge? The days that followed were strained even by the standards of their unusual marriage. They maintained the pretense of normalcy for the servants, dining together and sharing the drawing room in the evenings. But the silence between them had taken on a different quality. Before, it had been the silence of strangers learning to coexist. Now it was the silence of people who had wounded each other and did not know how to heal the damage. Yet the memory of how he had said her name haunted her. In the dark hours of the night, alone in her bed, she found herself replaying that moment. The roughness in his voice, the way it had seemed torn from him against his will. Adrian, too, seemed affected by that breach of formality. She caught him starting to speak her name several times, only to stop himself, reverting to the formal Lady Northwick with visible effort. The barrier had been crossed, however briefly, and neither of them quite knew how to rebuild it, or whether they wanted to. Rosalind threw herself into her duties as mistress of Ravensbrück with renewed vigor, as if constant activity could keep her from dwelling on her situation. She visited every tenant cottage, learning names and circumstances, identifying needs that had gone unaddressed. She reorganized the still room, working with Mrs. Morgan to ensure they had adequate supplies of medicines and preserves for the coming winter. She cataloged the library, discovering treasures that had been forgotten and organizing them in a more logical system. The servants noticed the change in their mistress. Where before she had been learning her role, now she claimed it with quiet authority. She was unfailingly kind, but maintained a reserve that had not been there before. Mrs. Morgan, who had begun to show real warmth toward her new mistress, found herself gently but firmly kept at a professional distance. Lord Northwick, meanwhile, seemed to withdraw even further into himself. He still attended to estate business with his usual efficiency, but there was a grimness to him now that concerned even Mr. Barnes, who had worked with him for 10 years. He rode out earlier and returned later, as if determined to spend as little time as possible in the house. Yet Rosalind noticed things that suggested her accusations had affected him more than his cold exterior suggested. She would catch him watching her when he thought she was unaware, and the expression on his face was not one of satisfaction or revenge, but something more complex. Regret, perhaps, or longing for something he did not know how to name. And always, she could see his lips forming her name silently, as if practicing for a conversation that never came. It was during this period of careful distance that disaster struck. Rosalind had ridden to the village to call upon the vicar's wife, who had recently been delivered of a child. It was a duty call, but a pleasant one. Mrs. Wordsworth was a sensible woman who did not pry into the obvious tensions in the Northwick marriage, but offered warm companionship and village news. The visit had gone well. The new baby was thriving, and Rosalind was in better spirits than she had been for days as she rode back through the Homewood. The path was familiar now, winding through ancient oaks and beeches that created a green cathedral overhead. Her mare, Artemis, was a steady, sensible creature who knew the way home and needed little guidance. Later, Rosalind would wonder what had startled the horse. A rabbit, perhaps, or a bird exploding from the underbrush. Whatever the cause, Artemis suddenly shied violently to the left, nearly unseating her rider. Rosalind, an accomplished horsewoman, would normally have kept her seat easily, but the saddle girth, improperly fastened by a new groom who had been nervous about handling the Marchioness's horse, gave way. She fell hard, her head striking a tree root with a sickening crack. The world exploded in stars. Then darkness claimed her. She woke to find herself in her own bed at Ravensbrück, with Mrs. Morgan bathing her forehead with lavender water and the local physician, Dr. Harper, peering at her with professional concern. Her head throbbed abominably, and when she tried to sit up, the room spun in alarming circles. The scent of the lavender was almost overwhelming, mixing with the earthier smell of some medicinal preparation the doctor had been applying. Dr. Harper insisted she remain still while he completed his examination. She had a nasty bump on her head and various bruises, he informed her, but no bones were broken and there was no sign of serious injury. Rest and quiet were prescribed, along with a powder for the headache if it became unbearable. It was Mrs. Morgan who revealed the full story of her rescue. Lord Northwick had been returning from visiting a tenant farm when he found Artemis wandering riderless. He had immediately searched for Rosalind, finding her unconscious in the wood. According to the groom who had helped, his lordship had been white as a sheet, cradling his wife with unexpected gentleness as he carried her to his horse, then holding her before him on the saddle for the ride home, all the while demanding that every doctor in the county be summoned. He had called her by her name repeatedly, Rosalind, Rosalind, as if the repetition could somehow call her back to consciousness. The image was so at odds with the cold, controlled man, she knew that Rosalind could hardly credit it. Yet when Lord Northwick finally entered her room, after she had insisted to Mrs. Morgan that she was well enough to receive him, his appearance confirmed the housekeeper's account. His usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, his cravat askew, his coat bearing traces of dirt and leaves from the forest floor. But it was his face that truly shocked her. The careful mask of indifference was completely gone, replaced by an expression of barely controlled fear that made him look years younger and infinitely more vulnerable. His relief when she assured him she would recover was palpable. He said her name again, Rosalind, and this time there was no barrier between them, no pretense of formality. It was simply her name on his lips, natural and right. When she learned he had dismissed the groom responsible for the loose girth, she protested that it seemed harsh for a simple mistake. His response, cut off mid-sentence but clearly indicating he had been about to say the mistake could have killed her, revealed more than he likely intended. The conversation that followed was perhaps the most honest they had yet shared. When she somewhat bitterly asked if he had been concerned about losing his instrument of revenge, the flash of pain in his eyes was unmistakable. His vehement denial, his confession that she mattered, God help him, she mattered more than she should, was delivered with such raw emotion that she could not doubt its sincerity. And through it all, he continued to use her name, as if once the dam had broken, he could not stop the flow. Her recovery took a week, during which Lord Northwick, Adrian, as she now dared to think of him, behaved in a most uncharacteristic manner. He visited her room several times a day, bringing books he thought she might enjoy, ensuring she had everything she needed for her comfort. He was still formal in some ways, still maintained physical distance, but there was a new quality to his attention, a watchfulness that suggested genuine concern rather than mere duty. And always, he called her Rosalind, the name becoming more natural on his lips with each repetition. It was during this week that he brought her a letter from her father. She opened it with some trepidation, expecting the usual combination of self-pity and requests for additional funds. Instead, she found something entirely different. Lord Beaumont had taken a position as estate manager with Sir Henry Fostwick in Yorkshire. The salary was modest, but sufficient, and more importantly, he had not touched a card or dice in 2 months. The position, she discovered, had been arranged by Adrian, who had connections with Sir Henry. When she questioned why he had done this, his response, that her concerns were now his, whether he wished it or not, was delivered with a gruffness that did not quite hide the kindness beneath. When she thanked him, calling him Adrian for the first time aloud, his startled pleasure was unmistakable. As spring turned to summer, their relationship began to shift again. The revelation about Lady Lydia and its aftermath had paradoxically cleared the air between them. The worst had been said, the ugly truth exposed, and somehow they had survived it. More than survived, they had begun to build something new on the ruins of their original arrangement. The use of their given names, once forbidden, now felt natural and necessary. Adrian began joining her for her morning rides. At first, these were silent affairs, two people who happened to be traveling in the same direction. But gradually, conversation began to flow. He would point out features of the estate, share bits of local history, ask her opinion on improvements he was considering. The formality that had once defined their interactions slowly melted away, replaced by something warmer, more genuine. She learned that he had been a lonely child, his father distant and demanding, focused entirely on increasing the family fortune and prestige. His mother had been his sole source of warmth, but she had been frequently ill, suffering from a weak constitution that ultimately claimed her life when he was 22. He had been at Cambridge when she died, and the guilt of not being there at the end still haunted him. In turn, she shared her own childhood, the constant anxiety of never knowing whether they would have food on the table or be forced to flee creditors in the night, the weight of trying to maintain appearances on nothing, the slow erosion of hope as her father's gambling grew worse. She spoke of her mother's grace under pressure, her determination to maintain standards even as their world crumbled, her death when Rosalind was 15 that had removed the last check on Lord Beaumont's vice. These morning rides became the foundation of their growing intimacy. Away from the house, away from servants and the formal roles they were required to play, they could simply be Adrian and Rosalind, two people learning to know each other. She discovered that beneath his cold exterior, Adrian possessed a dry wit that could make her laugh unexpectedly. He learned that her apparent meekness hid a sharp intelligence and a will of iron when she believed herself to be right. The breakthrough came on a morning in late July. They had stopped to rest the horses by a stream that marked the boundary between Ravensbrück and the neighboring estate. It was already warm despite the early hour, and Rosalind had removed her gloves to trail her fingers in the cool water. Adrian had dismounted and stood nearby, ostensibly checking his horse's hooves, but actually, she knew, watching her. The kiss, when it came, was unexpected despite the growing tension between them. One moment she was laughing at something he had said, a surprisingly witty observation about their neighbor's pretensions. And the next, he was there, his hands framing her face, his lips on hers with a hunger that spoke of months of suppressed desire. He said her name against her lips, Rosalind, Rosalind, as if it were a prayer. It was nothing like the brief cold touch at their wedding. This was fire and need and something desperate that made her knees weak. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, and the look in his eyes made her shiver despite the warmth of the morning. From that moment, everything changed. The careful distance they had maintained began to crumble. He would find excuses to touch her, helping her from her horse, offering his arm as they walked, brushing a strand of hair from her face. She found herself responding, leaning into his touch, seeking out his presence, feeling incomplete when he was away. Their use of each other's names became constant, each repetition a small intimacy that bound them closer. In the evenings, instead of maintaining separate spheres in the drawing room, he began to sit closer to her. He would read aloud while she embroidered, his voice bringing life to poetry and novels. When she played the pianoforte, he would stand behind her, turning the pages, his presence a warm weight at her back. Sometimes he would murmur her name as she played, so softly she might have imagined it. One evening, as she played a particularly moving piece by Mozart, she became aware that he had stopped turning pages and was simply watching her. When she turned to ask what was wrong, the expression on his face stopped her breath. It was a look of such naked longing that it made her heart race. He told her then how empty the house had been before she came, how she had brought life back to rooms that had been merely spaces to exist in. His confession that if he could do their marriage over, he would still choose her, not for revenge, not for convenience, but for herself, was delivered with such quiet intensity that she could not doubt its truth. He used her name with every sentence, as if making up for all the weeks when he had denied himself that simple pleasure. Her own confession, that she would choose him too, not for money or position, but because beneath all that ice was a heart worth winning, led to his rough admission that the heart in question was hers if she wanted it. When she said she did want it, calling him Adrian with all the tenderness she felt, his response was to kiss her again, this time with a gentleness that was somehow more devastating than passion. That night, they became truly husband and wife. The joining was everything their marriage had not been until then: passionate, tender, honest. Adrian was a gentle but thorough lover, worshipping her body with a reverence that brought tears to her eyes, murmuring her name like a litany of devotion. When she woke the next morning in his arms, she felt for the first time that she was truly home. The rest of the summer passed in a golden haze of growing intimacy and deepening love. They were inseparable, riding together in the mornings, working side by side on estate business, spending their evenings in shared contentment. The servants, who had watched their master's transformation with amazement, began to smile more, to go about their duties with a lighter step. The house itself seemed to wake from a long sleep, filled once again with warmth and laughter. The very air seemed different, no longer cold and sterile, but alive with possibility. But happiness, as they were about to learn, often attracts the attention of those who would destroy it. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in late August. Rosalind was in the morning room reviewing menus with Mrs. Morgan when Rushworth brought it in on a silver salver. The handwriting was feminine, elegant, but showing signs of distress in the way the ink had blotted in places. It was addressed to Lord Northwick and marked urgent. Even the paper itself seemed to carry a faint scent of desperation, a cloying perfume that made Rosalind's stomach turn. Adrian was in his study, and Rosalind took the letter to him herself, though something about it, perhaps that familiar perfume, made her uneasy. When he saw the handwriting, his face went white, then flushed with anger. He broke the seal with violent movements and read quickly, his expression growing harder with each line. Without a word, he crushed the letter and threw it into the fire. When Rosalind asked who it was from, his answer, Lydia, was spit out like a curse. The woman who had betrayed him 5 years ago, who had chosen passion over position, was now widowed, in debt, and desperate. She had written claiming to have made a terrible mistake, that she now realized what they had was real love, not the infatuation she had felt for her late husband. She wanted forgiveness, restoration to society, and, most audaciously, suggested that since Adrian's marriage was known to be a mere business arrangement, he might keep her as his mistress. The rage in Adrian's eyes was frightening, but Rosalind could see beneath it to the hurt, the reopening of wounds that had just begun to heal. When she suggested that perhaps facing Lydia directly would help him finally put the past to rest, he pulled her onto his lap, burying his face in her hair, holding her as if she were the only thing keeping him anchored to sanity. He said her name over and over, Rosalind, my Rosalind, as if reminding himself of what was real and present versus what was past and gone. But Lydia was not so easily dismissed. The next morning brought another letter, this time addressed to Rosalind herself. Against her better judgment, but driven by a need to understand this woman who had shaped so much of Adrian's life, she read it. The letter was a masterpiece of manipulation. Lydia claimed to want only to explain her side of the story, to help Rosalind understand the man she had married. She would be at the Crown Inn in Bakewell the following afternoon if Rosalind had any curiosity about the truth of Adrian's past. Rosalind made her decision quickly. She would go, not because she didn't trust Adrian, but because she needed to face this ghost that haunted their marriage. She needed to see for herself that Lydia was just a woman, not some supernatural force that could destroy their happiness. Moreover, she had learned in her years of managing her father's debts that sometimes the best way to deal with a threat was to confront it directly, to look it in the eye, and show no fear. She told no one of her plans, simply informing Mrs. Morgan that she would be visiting the village. She took the small carriage, driving herself rather than bringing a groom who might gossip. The Crown Inn was respectable, but not fashionable, the sort of place where someone of reduced circumstances might stay without causing comment. The building smelled of old wood and cooking fires, honest scents that contrasted sharply with the artificial perfume that had clung to Lydia's letter. She found Lydia in a private parlor, and her first thought was that Mr. Asherton had been right. There was a resemblance between them, though on closer inspection, it was superficial. They had similar coloring, but where Rosalind's features were warm and open, Lydia's were sharp, calculating, with a hardness about the eyes that spoke of disappointment and bitterness. The conversation that followed was a delicate dance of words and implications. Lydia admitted to leaving Adrian because she had been young and stupid, choosing passion over security. Her husband's passion had burned hot and bright but brief, leaving her with nothing when he died. She spoke of Adrian with a possessiveness that made Rosalind's skin crawl, claiming that part of him would always belong to her, that she had shaped him into who he was. When Lydia made her threats, she could create scandal, damage their reputations, make their lives difficult unless given money to maintain herself. Rosalind's response surprised them both. The years of dealing with creditors, of negotiating with tradesmen, of finding creative solutions to impossible problems had prepared her for this moment. She had learned to fight dirty, growing up with a gambling father, she informed Lydia coldly. She knew secrets about half the ton that would make Lydia's hair curl. If Lydia wanted assistance, she must agree to leave England entirely. America, perhaps, or the continent. The negotiation that followed was as cold as any business transaction. Lydia needed money. Rosalind wanted her gone permanently. They agreed on a sum, generous enough to allow Lydia to establish herself comfortably abroad, not so generous as to encourage further demands. The condition was absolute. Lydia must never return to England or contact them again. When Rosalind returned to Ravensbrück, she found the house in uproar. Adrian had discovered her absence and, learning she had taken the carriage alone, had feared the worst. He was in the entrance hall when she arrived, still in his riding clothes, his face white with fear that turned to fury when she admitted where she had been. The confrontation that followed was their most intense yet. He was angry that she had gone behind his back, furious that she had put herself at risk, but beneath it all was fear. Fear that Lydia's poison might have turned her against him, fear that the past might destroy the present they had built. He paced the hall like a caged animal, saying her name with each turn. "Rosalind, how could you? Rosalind, you don't understand what she's capable of. Rosalind, Rosalind." When he demanded to know what Lydia had said, Rosalind told him everything: the threats, the manipulation, but also the negotiation. She had arranged for Lydia to leave England permanently in exchange for a financial settlement. It was not forgiveness, she explained, but pragmatism. Remove the source of discord, and they could move forward unencumbered. Adrian's response was unexpected. He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, murmuring her name over and over like a prayer. When he finally released her enough to look at her face, his eyes were bright with unshed tears, the first she had ever seen from him. She had fought for him, he realized. She had faced his demon and vanquished it, not with drama or passion, but with cool practicality and fierce protectiveness. In that moment, the last of his walls crumbled. He loved her, he told her, completely and irrevocably, not as a possession or a symbol or a replacement for someone else, but as Rosalind, brilliant, brave, maddening Rosalind, who had saved him from a life of cold isolation. The arrangements with Lydia were concluded through solicitors, with no direct contact. Within a month, she had sailed for New York with funds sufficient to establish herself respectably. The condition was clear and legally binding. Any attempt to return to England or contact the Northwicks would result in immediate cessation of all financial support. With that ghost finally laid to rest, Adrian and Rosalind were free to build their life together properly. The change in Adrian was remarkable to all who knew him. The ice that had encased him for 5 years continued to thaw, revealing a man capable of great warmth, dry humor, and deep devotion. He smiled now, laughed even, and the sound of his laughter echoing through Ravensbrück's halls was like spring after a long winter. He could not seem to stop saying her name, as if making up for all the months of formal address. Rosalind, when he woke beside her. Rosalind, when he found her in the garden. Rosalind, when he held her in the darkness. By autumn, when Rosalind discovered she was with child, their transformation was complete. Adrian's joy at the news was almost comical. He, who had claimed to want only an heir for duty's sake, now fussed over her health with touching concern, bringing her delicacies to combat morning sickness, reading to her when she was tired, and spending long minutes with his hand on her still flat stomach, marveling at the life growing within. He would whisper to the child, calling it little one, and promising it would know only love and warmth, never the cold isolation he had known. The child, a son, was born the following spring, on a day when Ravensbrück's grounds were carpeted with bluebells. Adrian, who had paced the halls for hours during her labor, actually wept when he first held his son, tears of joy that washed away years of carefully maintained control. They named the boy James, after Rosalind's maternal grandfather, creating new family traditions rather than being bound by old ones. 2 years later came a daughter, whom they named Hope. Adrian's choice, surprisingly sentimental for a man who had once claimed to disdain sentiment. Watching him with their children, gentle and playful in ways she could never have imagined when they first met, Rosalind often thought of that cold, bitter man who had examined her like merchandise in her father's drawing room. That man was gone, or rather, had been revealed as merely a protective shell around a heart too wounded to risk feeling. Lord Beaumont, genuinely reformed and thriving in Yorkshire, visited occasionally. The relationship between father and daughter had healed slowly but genuinely. He doted on his grandchildren and treated Adrian with a respect that bordered on reverence, not for his title or wealth, but for the happiness he had brought to Rosalind. During one visit, he took Rosalind aside and, with tears in his eyes, begged her forgiveness for what he had done. She gave it freely, for without his desperate bargain, she would never have found Adrian. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Adrian surprised Rosalind with a gift, not jewelry or gowns, which he gave regularly, but something far more precious. He had commissioned a portrait of her mother based on the miniature Rosalind treasured and hung it in the place of honor in the family gallery at Ravensbrück. Standing before it, Rosalind felt tears prick her eyes. Her mother would have been proud, she thought, not of the title or the wealth, but of the love she had found and nurtured despite such unpromising beginnings. As the years passed, Ravensbrück Hall became known throughout the county as a house of warmth and welcome. The grand ball, held each Christmas, became the event of the social season, not for its grandeur, though it was grand, but for the genuine hospitality of its hosts. Adrian, once the cold recluse who avoided society, now moved through these gatherings with easy grace, though his eyes always sought Rosalind in the crowd, his face lighting when he found her. He would murmur her name when they danced, as if still marveling that she was his. Their children grew strong and happy, secure in their parents' love and the stability of their home. James showed signs of his father's intelligence and his mother's warmth, while Hope possessed her mother's beauty and her father's determination. Watching them play in the gardens where she had once walked as a stranger, hearing them call, "Mama, Papa," with such easy affection, Rosalind marveled at how much had changed. The Tun, which had initially viewed their marriage with salacious curiosity, eventually accepted them as one of those rare couples who had found genuine happiness despite an unconventional beginning. New scandals replaced old gossip, and Lord and Lady Northwick became simply part of the accepted landscape of society, respected, even envied, for their obvious devotion. One evening, as they sat before the fire in the drawing room, Adrian reading while Rosalind embroidered, their children long since put to bed, he suddenly set aside his book and looked at her with such intensity that she set down her needlework. He told her then that he had been thinking of that day 5 years ago, when he had first entered her father's drawing room, how he had thought he was purchasing a wife, as one might purchase a painting or a horse. How wrong he had been, he said with wonder. She had not been purchased. She had been a gift he had not deserved, a miracle he had not known to hope for. Every time he said her name, he told her it was a prayer of thanksgiving for the providence that had brought them together. Rosalind went to him then, settling in his lap as had become their custom in private moments. She told him that she too had been given a gift, the chance to heal a wounded heart, to bring warmth to a cold house, to build a love that was all the stronger for having been so unexpected. They had both been sold and bought, she said, but in the end, they had purchased each other with the only currency that truly mattered: love, patience, and the courage to trust after betrayal. And so another tale of hearts united reaches its blessed conclusion. Love, it seems, finds a way even through the strictest conventions of proper society. What began as a transaction, a daughter sold to pay her father's debts, a man seeking revenge through marriage, became something neither party had anticipated. For in seeking to use each other, they had instead found each other, and in finding each other, they had found themselves. The cold Marquis had discovered he was capable of great warmth, and the bartered bride had discovered she was worth far more than any price that could be paid. Together, they had built something precious from the ruins of their separate disappointments. A love that was, perhaps, all the stronger for having been so unlikely, so hard-won, so completely unexpected. In the end, the names that had once been withheld, Adrian and Rosalind, became the sweetest words in each other's vocabulary, spoken with love countless times across the years, a testament to the truth that even the coldest hearts can learn to love if given the chance and the right person to teach them how.